Right to Life Radio with John Gerardi on Powertalk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production of Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Gerardi.
The world's preemiest preemie has survived to his first birthday. And what does it mean? What does it mean for those of us who care about the abortion issue as a question of law and a question of public policy and a question of human dignity? Digging into that today here on Right to Life Radio, a production, as always, of Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org, if you want to learn more about us and what we do. So a really fun, it's a very heartwarming story. We don't get enough heartwarming stories here on Right to Life Radio. I'm bummed that Jonathan's not here for it. Jonathan Keller not with us today. Jonathan is usually totally up for heartwarming and happy stories, and I'm usually the dour, the bummer of the group. But today's story this is a really happy one, and it helps us to think through some of the issues surrounding legalized abortion in the United States. So this is a story from last Saturday, actually. The world's most premature baby has celebrated his first birthday after beating 0% odds of surviving. A baby born, this is a CNN story, a baby born weighing less than a pound has beaten the odds and celebrated his first birthday, becoming the most premature baby to survive, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. When Richard Scott William Hutchinson was born 5 months prematurely, recognized by Guinness as the world's most premature baby, his doctors prepared his parents for the worst. Richard was born at Children's Minnesota Hospital in Minneapolis, Minnesota, after his mother, Beth Hutchinson, suffered medical complications that caused her to go into labor. Born 131 days prior to the expected due date and weighing just 11.9 ounces. He wasn't even close to a pound. The kid was 12 ounces, not quite 12 ounces. So, by the way, 131 days prior, that means if 40 weeks of pregnancy is full term, so 280 days, 131 days prior, that means he was 21 weeks along. 21 weeks and 2 days. Born 131 days prior to the expected due date and weighing just 11.9 ounces, Richard was so tiny, his parents could hold him in a single palm of their hands, Guinness said. When his father, Rick, and Beth received prenatal counseling on what to expect with a baby born so early, they were given a 0% chance of survival by our neonatology team. Dr. Stacy Kern, Richard's neonatologist at Children's Minnesota, told the Guinness World Records, "I knew the first few weeks of Richard's life would be very difficult, but I felt that if he could make it through that, he would be a survivor." Due to the coronavirus pandemic, Richard's parents were unable to stay overnight with him at the hospital, and his other family members couldn't visit him either. So the parents traveled daily from their home in St. Croix County. I think it's French. It's Croix. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be pronounced Saint Croix, but I think in Wisconsin they call it St. Croix County, Wisconsin, to Minneapolis, according to Guinness. I wish my wife were here. She would correct my pronunciation to whatever it is in the Midwest. However, Midwesterners mispronounce St. Croix. "We made sure we were there to give him support," Rick told the Guinness World Records, his dad. "I think that helped him get through this because he knew he could count on us." Rick and Beth Hutchinson did not reply to CNN's request for comment. Take that, CNN. In December 2020, they're only talking to the Guinness World Records. Screw CNN. In December 2020, after spending more than 6 months in the hospital, Richard was able to go home with his family. "The day Richard was discharged from the NICU was such a special day. I remembered picking him up out of his crib and just holding him with tears in my eyes," Kern said. Kern was his doctor. "I couldn't believe this was the same little boy that once was so sick that I feared he may not survive. The same little boy that once fit in the palm of my hand with skin so translucent that I could see every rib and vessel in his tiny body. I couldn't help but squeeze him and tell him how proud I was of him." On June 5th, the lucky baby got to celebrate his first birthday surrounded by family and their 3 dogs. "It doesn't feel real," his mom Beth said about Richard breaking the record. "We're still surprised about it, but we are happy. It's a way we can share his story to raise awareness about premature births." Super cool story. Super happy story. Super exciting. This kid who beat the odds. And there's an obvious connection to the story with the abortion debate. Okay, this kid was 21 weeks along. There are kids who are aborted far later than that. And it's legal to do so. And this is one of the things the main thing that this story highlights is the absurdity of the legal standard we have in the United States surrounding fetal viability. All right? What is fetal viability? Viability is the point at time in a fetus's development when theoretically that fetus can survive outside the womb. And the difficulty with viability is that it's kind of a shifting standard. And it shifts depending on things that really have nothing to do with someone's essential human characteristics, human dignity, human value, or human worth. And really, it very often shifts depending on stuff that's totally extrinsic to a human being. So one of the things about the viability standard, the real main thing that determines whether a fetus is viable, whether a fetus can survive outside the womb, is lung development and lung capacity. If you've got really well-developed lungs, your odds of surviving at an earlier age are higher. And, I know there are a lot of different theories that pro-choicers like to use about when human life actually attains value. Most of us pro-lifers would say the very fact of being a human organism is what makes you valuable, and any human organism should be protected. But most pro-choicers, they have to come up with some kind of theory surrounding what you do. Some kind of theory, some kind of line drawing that says before you reach this developmental milestone, you can be aborted or killed, and after this developmental milestone, you may not be aborted or killed. That's essentially what every pro-choice person, every pro-choice thinker, essentially most of them have to do some kind of line drawing like that. Because otherwise the impositions you impose, there's some line you have to draw where the imposition of a pregnancy is not enough of a burden to justify abortion or is enough of a burden to justify abortion. There's some artificial line they have to draw. And for most pro-choice people, that line is usually based on something having to do with cognitive functioning. All right, Peter Singer thought it had to do with the ability to actualize or to express future hopes and dreams, future desires and goals in some way, shape, or form. So Peter Singer actually thought that infanticide would be a morally acceptable thing because he thought, hey, newborn babies can't do that. Newborn babies cannot do that in any realistic way, no more than fetuses can. So Peter Singer was both okay with abortion and okay with infanticide, basically thought parents should have a certain kind of trial period for a certain number of months after the baby is born to decide whether they want to keep the baby or not. Peter Singer, not too far distant from the ancient Roman practices of birth control. Ancient Romans sort of had a similar thought that after the baby was born, if you weren't crazy about having this baby, maybe the baby was a child of a slave, just leave the baby somewhere to die, and maybe the baby gets picked up by someone, maybe not, and that's that. That was the chief Roman practice for birth control in an era, obviously in the ancient world, not much access to contraception or actual abortion was extremely dangerous. So that was the chief Roman method of birth control. Anyway, usually if you're picking and choosing a line for when human beings are valuable or not, most pro-choicers will pick something that has to do with cognitive functioning. But fetal viability is based on lung capacity. I've never heard anyone argue that the lung is like the center of what it means to be human. And so fetal viability was always a silly dividing line, I think, for deciding when abortion can and can't be imposed. And viability has been embedded in America's abortion law ever since 1992. So in 1992, the Supreme Court issued its decision, Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And what the court said in Casey was, before fetal viability, states can't impose any kinds of restriction on abortion whatsoever. After fetal viability, states can ban abortion except in instances where the mother's health is threatened, and that's the thing, is that literally every pregnancy implicates a mother's health, according to the extremely capacious definition of health given in Doe versus Bolton, a recent Supreme Court case on the topic. Or not a recent Supreme Court case, the 1973 Supreme Court case issued on the same day as Roe v. Wade that defined what the mother's health means. Literally any pregnancy One of the factors of health was called familial health. So if your family dynamic is upset by having this baby, which every unplanned, every unwanted pregnancy does, then it justifies having an abortion after fetal viability. So, nevertheless, we make viability a somewhat important point, at least on paper, in American abortion law. California's abortion laws track pretty much consistently with Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Abortion is legal prior to fetal viability and is only legal after fetal viability when the health exception qualifies it, which every pregnancy so qualifies. And yet, this little Richard, we got to find some Little Richard tunes for the rest of the show. Maybe we'll do that for music for bumpers. Unless you've already got something else lined up, Raphael. Don't worry about it. All right. Basically, what this little baby Richard is demonstrating is that viability has nothing to do even with internal capacities of oneself as a human being. One of the biggest factors for fetal viability is how good your NICU is, how good the local NICU is. It's dependent on technology in a lot of cases. It's dependent on technology, your hospital setup, the commitment your hospital has to resuscitate preemies who are born at 22 weeks. If you've got a great NICU with a real program in place for taking care of 22-weekers, then viability for you is probably 2 weeks earlier, or it could be a full week sooner than it is for a baby who has the bad luck of being born near a cruddy NICU. And that's the absurd thing with fetal viability, is that it not only is it based on stuff that's not really intrinsic to human worth, like lung capacity, your biological sex. Maybe there are even some factors related to race, where some, depending on your genetic background, ethnic background, whatever, you might have more developed lungs earlier. So fetal viability is a standard that is based on stuff that we would otherwise view as totally meaningless. All right. If Michael Phelps has a baby, maybe his baby has, is going to have a viability point that's sooner than, my baby would be. Okay. I am not Michael Phelps. I don't have the same lung capacity Michael Phelps has. Or, let's say some Ugandan marathon runner. All right. My lung capacity is way worse than the best Kenyan or Ugandan marathon runner. So are his babies more valuable than my babies? No. All babies are equally valuable. And we use this standard of fetal viability. We use the standard of fetal viability basically because of this unspoken argument. This unspoken argument that the more dependent you are, somehow the less valuable you are. And if anything, this has it totally backwards. Being dependent on people does not make you less of a human. In fact, that's a totally intrinsic part about what it means to be human. As my professor, Carter Sneed from Notre Dame Law School, says in his great book that I always recommend on this show, What It Means to Be Human. We all live on a spectrum of disability, all of us human beings. We enter this world as embryos and fetuses, radically dependent on our moms for survival and sustenance. We're born and are still radically dependent on mom and dad or caregivers. As children, we continue to be dependent. And then finally, we become adults. And maybe sometime around age 27, we stop being dependent on our mom and dad. And maybe it's different in other countries. In Italy, maybe when you're a 35-year-old man, you're not dependent on your parents anymore. And you're in the period of your own strength. And then you take on obligations for other people. I then become someone on whom my children depend. When my parents get older, I might be called upon to care for them or called upon to care for others. And then when I get older, I will once again be dependent on other people. To be human means to be in a body. To be human means to be dependent. Unborn children, just because they are dependent before viability, that does not make them less human. We'll develop these ideas a little bit more in the next segment. This is Right to Life Radio on Powertalk 96.7 AM 1400, a production of Right to Life of Central California. John Gerardi here with you. All right. In honor of the smallest preemie in the world, a little boy named Richard Hutchinson, we're going to be playing Little Richard songs all throughout the show. In honor of little Richard Hutchinson, who was born 5 months. This little boy was born 5 months prematurely. 21 weeks, and is the youngest baby on the most premature preemie on record to have survived. And he's made it to his first birthday just about a week ago. So congratulations to little Richard Hutchinson and to his parents, Beth and Rick, from Minneapolis. They're from, I think, Wisconsin, and this Richard was taken care of by a great NICU team at Children's Minnesota Hospital in Minneapolis. And at the end of the last segment, I want to spend a little bit more time developing this. At the end of the last segment, I talked a little bit about the great book from one of my old professors at Notre Dame Law School, What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics, written by Carter Snead, which I really encourage all of you to get. I think it's actually, they've cut the price for it. It's published by Harvard University Press, and Harvard University Press, they're a bunch of highway robbers over there. At Harvard, and they were charging like $70 for the book. I think you can get it for like $35 or something. So, still kind of pricey, but it's worth it. It's a great book, and it's a book about bioethics and sort of ethical philosophy, sort of how, and his chief thesis is that the way that Americans look at bioethical problems is wrong-headed because we have the wrong idea about what it really means to be human. So much of our discourse about what we actually think it means to be human. And I often say this about philosophy. A lot of people will say, oh, I don't care about philosophy. Philosophy sounds ridiculous. Sounds like a bunch of French guys smoking clove cigarettes and whatever. I don't need no philosophy. I'm just a normal guy. Saying that you don't care about philosophy is kind of like being a fish and saying you don't care about water. Philosophy is actually, in some ways, it's closer to you than the air that you breathe. Most of your unspoken assumptions that you have about existence, about meaning, about ethics, about all kinds of topics, they are philosophical propositions. And so many of these things get sort of baked into our education system and in media and the way we talk about things and the way we think about things. There are all sorts of unspoken assumptions that we sort of take for granted. So many of us Americans take for granted. Well, most of us think we should do that, so we should do that. I mean, that's a hugely philosophical idea, the notion that a democratic majority rule should be what determines, and that's totally different from the way that maybe someone who grew up in a monarchy might think, who would maybe think, well, maybe the best person here should just decide, okay? Or an oligarchic system where it's only a few guys who are the smartest guys in the room who get to decide, and all of you other people who aren't educated or aren't smart or aren't virtuous or whatever, you shut up and you don't get a say in the matter. There are all kinds of things that are sort of unspoken assumptions we have as Americans about all kinds of things, whether it's ethics, whether it's the nature of existence. Philosophy is closer to you than the air you breathe. Saying you don't care about philosophy is, again, like being a fish saying you don't care about water. And some of the unspoken assumptions we have about what it means to be human are very between the ear centric. They're very much focused on me. That a human being is uniquely a human being based on his own capacities in some way, shape, or form. That what it really means to be human is to have these intellectual capacities. And it's in this form that Professor Snead describes called expressive individualism. Expressive individualism, it's a kind of broad concept that's hard to sort of boil down into one sentence. But chiefly what it means, it entails some of these things that I talked about in the first segment. The philosopher Peter Singer from Princeton. Philosopher Peter Singer from Princeton thought that human beings didn't derive value until they could envision future hopes and desires and goals. That's what he thought characterized you as a human. The ability to sort of envision future hopes and goals. And he basically, using that standard, excludes from the realm of humanity unborn children and most infants. And further, he probably also excludes, and I think actually he has written about this, he excludes other human beings, whether people who've suffered some kind of injury that lessens their cognitive functions, maybe someone in advanced Alzheimer's, etc., who can't do some of those expressive things, can't do some of those future envisioning things. And I think that's really flawed, because what Singer does, he winds up leaving out tons and tons of people from the definition of humanity. He probably leaves out anyone who has Down syndrome, or many people who have Down syndrome anyway. He leaves out people who've had injuries. He leaves out the old elderly. He leaves out the young. There are a whole lot of human beings who fall out of his vision of what it means to be human. And it's really fundamentally chucks out any notion of fundamental human equality. It chucks out a whole bunch of things. And what Professor Snead is sort of offering as a competing argument is the idea that being in a body, having a body, and the body's own strengths and limitations are a core part of what it means to be a human being. Which sounds so silly and obvious when you say it, but to say that but it's actually very controversial, because it gets applied to the abortion case. It gets applied to all kinds of cases. And the natural weakness to strength to weakness that you see in the course of your development as an embryo totally dependent on mom, to an adult completely independent and taking care of other people, to an elderly person who's sick and needs other people to care for him. That's part of what it means to be human, that you receive care and you give care. That we all live on this spectrum of disability. So that's the combative, I guess the response that Professor Snead has is that no, the core of what it means to be human is this giving and receiving of care, this acknowledgement of bodily frailty, but loving someone regardless. So this notion that because someone is not yet viable, because a fetus is not yet viable, therefore they should not be treated as a person, it cuts away at the very notion of what it is to be human at all. That to be human means at various points to be weak and dependent, at other points to be strong and have others depending on you, but nevertheless to acknowledge a certain dignity that is consistent and equal and going through all of those periods of life. When we return, more on abortion funding and more on abortion legislation in Congress. That is next on Right to Life Radio, right here on Power Talk. When we return, Catholic members of Congress are outraged at the idea that bishops in the Roman Catholic Church might be talking about the rules for receiving communion, which might exclude pro-abortion politicians. We'll get to that next on Right to Life Radio, a production of Right to Life of Central California. All Little Richard all the time this week on the Right to Life radio program. This is in honor of the world's smallest preemie celebrating his first birthday last week, a little boy named Richard Hutchinson. So he's Little Richard because he was less than a pound when he was born. He was like less than 12 ounces when he was born. He was 11.9 ounces. So this whole week on the Right to Life radio program, we are going to be playing Little Richard. Also, you may have noticed we have these new little promo bumpers for Dizon Medicine and Dizon Medicine Plus. Dr. Dominic Dizon is a supporter of Right to Life and wanted to sponsor Right to Life radio. So we are very grateful to him for supporting us in that way. And we think he's a great dude. So, hey, if you are looking for an urgent care clinic, if you're looking for a doctor, you could certainly do a heck of a lot worse than Dr. Dominic Dizon. He's a great guy, and we are grateful for his support of Right to Life Radio. I want to talk about the issue. I've talked about it a couple of times, but the issue of Catholic bishops and Holy Communion for pro-choice politicians. The U.S. bishops last Friday had, it was the end of their sort of week-long, I think bishops have like every once a year or twice a year or something, they have meetings as a body, and they were discussing the idea. They took a vote on writing a document talking about the Catholic sacrament of the Eucharist. One of the things that they want to discuss in that document is this notion of Eucharistic consistency or Eucharistic coherence. Basically, the idea as Catholics, you can't be receiving Holy Communion is a really important thing for Catholics. We aren't supposed to be receiving Holy Communion if we have committed serious sins. And also the Catholic Church has certain rules in place that if people are engaged, because the Eucharist is so sacred and so important for Catholics, that if people are engaged in public, manifest, grave sins, that the Church should not be giving them communion. Okay? If Hugh Hefner were to show up at a Catholic church and try to receive communion, the priest should politely but firmly say, Mr. Hefner, we are not going to give you Holy Communion. Okay, your public life, your public advocacy is such that your life is not consistent with Catholic faith and our belief on the natural moral law. So, no, we're not going to give you Holy Communion. If Hugh Hefner did that, if a porn star did that, if a famous, if the president of Planned Parenthood showed up to Mass to try to receive communion, etc. And the question is whether that teaching, whether that praxis, I guess is the best way to put it, whether that discipline, that internal discipline of the Church, should be applied to Catholic politicians, baptized Catholic politicians, who nonetheless support abortion rights. Obviously, the Catholic Church is very opposed to abortion, and we are in a unique situation right now where the President of the United States is a Roman Catholic, but at the same time, he is a vigorous supporter of abortion rights, abortion funding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, what does one do? Basically, the American bishops want to clarify that, and I think what they want to do is give a little bit more backing to individual bishops who say, listen, I'm dealing with a Catholic politician who lives within my diocese, within my area that I serve. I'm dealing with a Catholic politician. This politician is a consistent abortion supporter. I have talked with this person. I have tried to counsel this person, to correct this person. They have refused my counsel and correction. Therefore, I'm going to advise the priest of my diocese to not give this person Holy Communion. They are supporting something that is really deeply, seriously evil. not just something that I think is wrong, not just something that I personally don't agree with, not something that a policy that I don't think is the wisest. They are supporting policies that actively promote abortion, policies that actively fund abortion overseas, policies that force religious institutions to pay for abortion as part of their health insurance plans when they don't want to, that force the American taxpayer to pay for abortion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need to go into the whole litany of things that pro-choice politicians do. So this is really a question of internal Catholic, housekeeping in a way. And it has provoked from the pro-choice world this total outrage. All over Twitter, I'm seeing all these people yelling that, well, the Catholic Church has its precious tax-exempt status. If they're going to start getting political, maybe we should take it away. It's not getting political on the church's part. It's politics getting into the church's business. Separation of church and state. This is not the church interfering with politics. This is politics interfering with the church. You have the church's own members violating the church's own rules and the church trying to decide how they're going to deal with it. Now, this has prompted from a number of Catholic Democrats who are members of the House of Representatives a statement of principles, as they call it. This is a statement of principles in which these Catholic Democrat members of Congress basically are calling on the bishops, don't you dare refuse anyone communion. Don't you do it. And they're defending their advocacy for, as they call it, safe, legal abortion. Now, I want to talk about some of the points they made and write out and read some of these points. So they say, we envision a world in which every child belongs to a loving family and agree with the Catholic Church about the value of human life. You don't quite agree, though. You think some human life should be protected under law and others shouldn't. Anyway, each of us is committed to reducing the number of unintended pregnancies and creating an environment with policies that encourage pregnancies to be carried to term and provides resources to raise healthy and secure children. That's why you support Planned Parenthood, which has all of those, abortion, all of those adoption referrals that they do. Oh, wait, they have shockingly few adoption referrals and fewer every year. In all these issues, and then they talk about some of the things, we believe this includes promoting alternatives to abortion, such as adoption. They're not really very vigorously at promoting adoption, improving access to children's health care and child care, and creating a child benefit through the expanded and improved child tax credit. Okay, so that's the salve to their consciences for supporting an unfettered right to abortion. The child tax credit. That's the solution. We'll give you more money if you decide to keep your kid. And look, I'm not knocking any of these individual policies, by the way. Promote adoption. Great. Improve access to children's health care. Go for it. And child care. Go for it. The child benefit through the expanded and improved child tax credit. As someone with 4 kids, let me tell you something. There is no Biden policy I am more enthusiastic for right now than that child tax credit, because the 4 Gerardi kids are going to net us about $13,000 from the federal government by the time the next 12 months are over. Nevertheless, they say this: in all these issues, we seek the church's guidance and assistance, but believe also in the primacy of conscience. In recognizing the church's role in providing moral leadership, we acknowledge and accept the tension that comes with being in disagreement with the church in some areas. Let me break this down. We seek the church's guidance and assistance, but we also believe in the primacy of conscience. This fundamentally doesn't seem to catch what conscience is supposed to be. So we seek the church's guidance and assistance, but if we don't agree with it, then we just shove it aside. In recognizing the church's role in providing moral leadership, it's hard to provide moral leadership if people don't follow it. Kind of hard to be a leader if no one's following you. We acknowledge and accept the tension that comes with being in disagreement with the church in some areas. Oh, well, you accept the tension that comes with disagreement with the church. Okay, well, I'm glad you accept it. But maybe the church doesn't accept the fact that you're just rejecting her leadership. And this is not, I realize this starts sounding like very much inside Catholic Church baseball for some of you out there, but I think this is very much applicable in the Protestant world as well. That, we see the tension with St. Paul's writings in his works on certain things, and we accept the tension that comes with that. I mean, this is very, very similar things. Here's the thing I hate about the way that this document talks about conscience. And by the way, if you want a local angle on this, Congressman Jim Costa, who represents South Fresno and then also Madera County, if you're wondering how he represents South Fresno, but then Madera, which is in the north, let me tell you about this little thing called gerrymandering. It's where we craft bizarrely shaped congressional districts so that people can get reelected. Jim Costa signed this letter. So there's a little bit of a local flavor to this. They keep citing this notion of conscience. And yes, we all have a duty to follow our conscience. You should always do what you think to be the right thing. But you also have a duty before that to form your conscience, okay? I mean, I can follow my conscience all day long. But if I never formed my conscience with, I guess let's go with a generic Christianity here. If I never formed my conscience with some of the biblically based ethical teaching of the natural law, if I never formed my conscience with some of the harder sayings of Jesus Christ or the Apostle Paul, if I never formed my conscience by the consistent ethical teaching of the Catholic Church over 2,000 years, if I never formed my conscience, then it makes my following of my conscience kind of meaningless. Conscience is only valuable insofar as it's a good conscience. It's a well-formed conscience. So this notion that they can just say, well, we appreciate the church's leadership, but at the end of the day here, we're going to follow our conscience. No, that's not, you don't get to do that. That's not how conscience works, okay? If you're Catholic, okay, and that's the sad thing about this, is that I think this letter from these members of Congress betrays a fundamental misunderstanding about what the Catholic Church, what's sort of involved in the Catholic Church. And again, I'm realizing this is inside baseball, but if you're a Catholic, you sort of accept that the church has moral authority to teach. If you're a Protestant, you accept that the Bible has moral authority to teach. And you can't then just sort of pick and choose the kinds of things you're going to believe in and the kinds of things you are not. When we return, I want to talk about one of the big weasel ways in which pro-choice politicians try to get out of their commitment to uphold a culture of life. The idea of personally believing something but not necessarily imposing it. That's next on Right to Life Radio, a production of Right to Life in Central California. John Gerardi here with you. Little Richard for you on Right to Life Radio. This again in honor of little Richard Hutchinson, a little baby boy who turned 1 year old, the smallest preemie ever born. So we're congratulating him by playing a bunch of Little Richard because he was indeed a little Richard. Right to Life Radio is, of course, a production of Right to Life Central California, and I want to thank the members of the Right to Life 300 Club. These are folks who support Right to Life of Central California by giving $25 a month. That's $300 a year, which is a great way for all of you who are listening, who, if you appreciate this show, you can support Right to Life in that way, and it helps us keep the lights on and helps support a lot of our day-to-day operations. So thank you all so much. I'm going to acknowledge all the people who've joined 300 Club since May of 2021. We've got Marianne Belfi, Mike and Leanne Bone, Barbara Fletcher, M. Jean Floro, Vicente and Maria Rios Garza, Nathan Ribb, John Thornton, Luis and Cecilia Vasquez, Stephen and Courtney Escada, Richard Ashodian, Angelica Balderas, Johnny and Teresa Dominguez, and Patricia Letts. Thank you all so much for supporting us. We cannot do what we do without you. So thank you all again. All right. To close out the show, we have all of these Catholic pro-choice politicians very mad that Catholic bishops are thinking about writing a letter saying, hey, you shouldn't receive communion if you're a Catholic and you're supporting legalized abortion. And this leads me to what has long been the Joe Biden argument in favor of legalized abortion, which is that basically the argument goes, I don't disagree with the Catholic Church or with the Bible, and this is applicable to almost any religious group where the religion itself opposes abortion, but a politician from that religion supports it. Basically, the notion is, I don't support abortion personally. I personally agree that abortion is immoral. But just because I think it's immoral doesn't mean that we need the state to outlaw it. Just because we think abortion is immoral doesn't mean we need the state to use its coercive power to suppress it. This is, and they sometimes, especially Catholics, will cite St. Thomas Aquinas on this. Thomas Aquinas did say that the state doesn't need to suppress every single vice all the time, especially if greater harms will result. And that's the problem, is the greater harms that may result prong of it. Is that basically what these politicians are saying is, yeah, I know that this is the murder of innocents, but the greater harms that will result, they can't actually cite the greater harms that will result. And furthermore, it's also so hypocritical. Many of these people want to suppress all kinds of other things that are bad. They want to use the levers of government to correct all kinds of other things that they believe to be injustices. And rightly so. We use the coercive power of government to try to combat racism. We use the power of government to abolish private arrangements of racism, like segregation, like refusing to serve African Americans in certain businesses. We abolish slavery. We abolish this. We abolish that. We use the coercive power of the state to get rid of all kinds of vices. We outlaw, in most states, we outlaw prostitution. We outlaw drug use of most forms. And yet the one thing that these liberal politicians don't want to use the coercive power of the state to oppose, heck, politicians in California want to curb the horrible vice of ever letting someone under the age of 18 go get a tan at a tanning salon. Now, I agree, tanning salons are not good for you, especially if you're young. And it's pretty dang paternalistic for the state of California to say, as it has, nope, if you are a minor, even if you are walking into a tanning salon at 17 years and 364 days of age, holding your parents' hands, your mom's hand in one hand, your dad's hand in the other hand, and both of them say, we allow our daughter to get one quick tan in the tanning booth. Nope, no good. No good. So the one vice that liberals don't want to use the coercive power of the state to stop is abortion, which involves the direct taking of innocent human life. And it's so weak. It's basically saying, yeah, I acknowledge this is murder, but I don't want to do anything to stop it. It's weak, it's lame, and it's, I think, quite obviously wrong. Well, folks, the best is yet to come, as Francis Albert Sinatra is letting us all know as we close out the show. Thank you all so much for listening to Right to Life Radio. We will see you next week right here on Power Talk. John Gerardi for Right to Life of Central California, signing off.